You are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. So one of the fun things about having this podcast is I get to invite people to come into the ladies' room who I meet in all kinds of interesting places. And I met our next guest, Jaime Sanders, who goes by the Migraine Diva. So you know, as soon as I found that out, I had to invite her to come talk with us. But we met at the annual gala for healthywomen.org at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C. So la-ti-da. We did not meet on the line to get into the ladies' room, but we met on the line to get into the photo booth, which was even more fun. So as soon as I saw her card and I saw that she goes by the Migraine Diva, I said, oh, we have to talk. And today is that talk. So welcome, Jaime.
Thank you so much for having me, Donica. I'm so excited to have this chat with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So before we get into migraines and how you became the Migraine Diva, aside from this experience, what's the most unique, different, interesting, or exciting, or memorable experience you ever had in a ladies' room?
Oh my goodness. I would have to say a lot of them probably come from a lot of the conferences and summits that I go to. Just within the breaks that we have and just meeting up in the ladies' room and just having just girl talk and girl chat. And being outside of that patient advocate role and just being a regular girl, I really look forward to those breaks and just having just that girl time. So I really look forward to those, and they're just really down to earth and just really fulfilling to have, because migraine is so isolating. So to be able to have those moments are really treasurable for me.
And migraine is also extremely common. So I'm sure a lot of the people who you talk to on those lines in the ladies' rooms also have migraines. And of course, that's what I immediately resonated with when you said you were the Migraine Diva. So tell me, how did you become the Migraine Diva? How did this all start? And when was your first migraine?
Well, I'll start with my history with migraine. I think it's easier to start at that point. So I was diagnosed with migraine when I was 8 years old. And migraine does run on my mother's side of the family. So she pretty much had a good idea that my symptoms were related to migraine, although she wanted to rule everything out, make sure it wasn't a brain tumor or anything like that. But it was really rare for somebody like myself at that age in the 80s to get diagnosed by a physician and a neurologist with migraine. So I was very lucky in that regard to get that diagnosis and to get treatment right away. But they stayed pretty episodic throughout most of my childhood, although it did make a big impact on my school attendance and being able to participate in school, and my peers and teachers not fully understanding what migraine is. And there was some bullying in elementary school around my symptoms and being blamed for making them up and just seeking attention. So that was difficult and kind of caused me to internalize what I was feeling and not vocalize my discomfort or my pain, and not really trusting others to be there to help me.
So for the benefit of people who are listening who don't have migraine, can you explain what your symptoms typically were?
Well, when I was a child, my symptoms were mostly abdominal. So I had a lot of abdominal pain, a lot of nausea, vomiting. And I did have the classic photophobia, the sensitivity to light, and phonophobia, the sensitivity to sound, and sensitivity to strong odors and smells and scents. Those were really huge symptoms for me as well. And being in school in bright lights, that was difficult. And working off papers that were on bright white paper was hard for my eyes. And, you know, those small things really made a huge impact on how I was able to get through the school day. It was really difficult. So by the time, 3 o'clock came around, I was pretty spent.
Mhm. And tell us about the pain. Did you pretty much have the typical one-sided throbbing pain, or tell us what the pain was like?
Yeah, I certainly had the one-sided pain. My pain is located on the left side behind my left eye. It's very intense. It felt like somebody was hammering my eyeball inside my skull. And there was intense throbbing around my temple. And it was just very intense. And the pressure was insane. And sometimes it felt like my head was going to explode. And there really wasn't any pain relief for me at that time. So I had to just suffer through them, which
So
was
that's a very important thing to let people know. In the mid 1980s, we didn't have great drugs for migraine. The drugs that we did have available, it's unlikely they would have given them to an 8-year-old because they didn't
right.
have barbiturates in them. And I remember, and I still feel very guilty about this, even though I had my first migraine at 12 and a half. And, you know, most people with migraine can tell you exactly where they were, what they were wearing, what they were eating, what they were doing when they had their first migraine. What I've also noticed about people with migraine is we talk about my migraine, you know, because each of us have symptoms that are a little bit different. But I had my first one when I was 12 and a half, but then I did not have my second migraine until about 20 years later when I was pregnant with my first child,
Mhm.
which is pretty typical. About 50% of people who have one migraine won't have another one. And many of them will just not have another one for many, many years, or until what we call a hormonally sensitive time. Hormonally sensitive means, of course, premenstrual, during your period, during pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, premenopause. The good news is generally, once you go through menopause, they generally subside, although not always. And of course, migraines don't just affect women, but they're about 6 times more common in women than men. So I just want to acknowledge that because we do have men who listen and we acknowledge that. But one thing I felt very guilty about since the mid 80s, 1988 to be precise, I did have a colleague who was a resident who had very frequent migraines. And what I now realize in retrospect, and now that I'm older and wiser, is that she probably had menstrual migraine because she
Mhm.
had, you know, about 5 days a month she had a migraine. And we didn't bully her, but we definitely disrespected her and talked about her behind her back. And we definitely felt that she was doing what we call drug seeking behavior. You know, nobody would say that now with migraine because now we have great drugs that don't have any narcotics or barbiturates in them. But anyway, I interrupted your story. So you were getting bullied in school, you had the migraines,
Yeah, so that pretty
you had
much
to take medication.
continued. That pretty much continued through elementary school, grade school, high school. But I stayed as active as possible. I played in the orchestra. I danced ballet 3 to 4 times a week. So I tried not to let it interrupt my life too much. And also, my doctors gave me this false sense of hope. They told me I would outgrow it by the time I turned about 17 or 18. So I thought that migraine.
Off by about 43 years. 40 years.
Yeah, so I thought that migraine had an expiration date. So I was like, well, I can get through, you know, these years as long as I know they're eventually going to subside. And plus, my mother rarely had an attack, so I saw her as an example. So I didn't think migraine was really going to be a big deal for the rest of my life. And that continued to be the case. I still have migraine past 18 into my early 20s. And just like with you, my last pregnancy is when I had my first intractable migraine. And I didn't know.
Tell people what you mean by intractable.
Intractable is basically a migraine that lasts more than 72 hours. And so I've had a migraine for my entire first trimester. So I had a migraine every day for 3 months.
Right.
And it just would not go away. And that was brought on by my hormonal changes because I was pregnant. But I didn't know the terminology of that at the time. And I thought, okay, this is the most severe migraine I've ever had. So I thought it had to be something more serious. So I had an MRI done, And I was expecting there to be something found, like a tumor. Nothing was found. So I was highly disappointed. And nobody wants to be told they have a brain tumor. But you also don't want to be told, well, it's just a migraine, because there's really not much I could do about that. So I was disappointed to find out that I was just having this long migraine that just will not subside.
Although by that time, we had much better medications available.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was able to be put on a preventive medication that wouldn't harm the baby while I was pregnant. But I was still pretty intractable that first trimester. Once I hit my second trimester, they subsided and weren't as frequent. But as far as pain goes, all I could take was Tylenol and drink a cup of coffee. So it was still kind of hard to manage that. And I was working full time and going to school full time at night. So it was hard to get that pregnancy.
You had one other child, or how many children do you have?
I had 2 smaller children at home, and I was pregnant with my third.
So that's a lot.
It was hard. It was a lot.
Explain to people why coffee is helpful with a migraine.
Well, coffee is thought to help dilate the blood vessels. And it helps some people.
Because of the caffeine.
Because of the caffeine, right.
So we're always busting on caffeine with respect to so many other disorders and conditions, but for migraine, caffeine is your friend.
Yes, for a lot of people, caffeine works tremendous wonders. For some people, caffeine can be a trigger, but it's very common for people to have a cup of coffee or have a carbonated soda with caffeine to help ease their migraine. And it kind of helps take the edge off. It's not going to completely, at least for me, it doesn't like knock my migraine out, but it helps take the edge off.
So the other thing that caffeine is believed to do is it's believed to act synergistically with other pain relievers, particularly with Tylenol or any of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. In fact, caffeine is what I call the secret ingredient in Excedrin migraine.
Right.
Yeah, that's why Excedrin, can work for people with, mild to moderate migraine if you take it immediately.
Right. And that's the important thing, knowing, how your migraine manifests and knowing what your symptoms are. And sometimes people don't realize if, you're yawning a lot more than usual, that can be, a warning sign of migraine is coming on. So learning what your warning signs are and be like, okay, this is my cue to take my medication. That's very important. Otherwise, the medication is not as effective. If you're in the middle of a migraine attack, it's going to be really difficult to abort it at that point. So knowing what your cues are and learning what your body's trying to tell you is very important. And take some time to figure it out, because some of them are really mundane and things you don't really consider to be out of the ordinary. But frequent urination, yawning, mood swings, weird food cravings, those can be your signs that a migraine is approaching.
Well, and some people have a traditional aura.
Exactly.
Did you have the aura with yours?
I've never had aura.
Me either.
So I have typical migraine without aura.
But explain to people what aura is.
Well, an aura is usually a visual disturbance that you have prior to the actual head pain. And it can last a few minutes to maybe about 30 minutes. And usually occurs maybe about 30 minutes to an hour before the head pain. So you can see zigzagging lights, flashes of lights, or you can have like your vision completely kind of taken from you and just, you just can only see just a small bit of area in front of you. So it affects people differently. Everybody who has the aura, has different auras. You can also have auditory auras. Aphasia is considered a type of aura. Aphasia is where you're unable to speak. You lose your words. And so you're trying to speak, but just mumble jumble comes out. That's considered.
And some people can have nausea as part of it.
Exactly. So migraine is.
I go straight to pain, straight to headache.
Yeah. Pretty much so do I. The pain and the nausea pretty much come together. One doesn't precipitate the other. So, which I don't know which is worse, to be honest. To be hit with both at the same time.
Used to be called back in the day before you were born. Migraine used to be called a sick headache, and the reason migraine was called a sick headache is not the way we use the term, or the way kids use the term sick now, like meaning extreme, but because you got sick to your stomach.
Right. Yeah. Thankfully, I really don't get to that point anymore. That was a huge part of my migraine symptom as a child. The vomiting was like a huge part of my symptom. I do experience gastric distress, but the vomiting doesn't really occur that often, but the nausea is still really severe. It's still debilitating. So it's really, sometimes the nausea can be worse sometimes for me than the actual physical pain, because it's so intense and it just will not go away. And I wish it would result in me vomiting, because then I would have some relief, but that doesn't happen. So I feel like I'm in this never ending torture cycle. So it's like today I'm having like extreme nausea, and it's just like, it's killing me. But I love ginger. Ginger's great for stomach issues and nausea. So I drink a lot of ginger tea. So I've been like just downing that today. But yeah, nausea is a huge part of migraine, and one that's just as debilitating as the pain.
So the other word you used that we didn't follow up with is you talked about triggers. So for a lot of people, migraines have very specific triggers. And, back to that concept of my migraine, people try to figure out what their triggers are. Some people, their trigger is it's a day ending in Y. But for other people, they have very specific triggers. So for me, for example, I have two very specific triggers. One is red wine, which I no longer touch the stuff at all. You could torture me and I wouldn't have red wine. And the other is sleep deprivation. So pretty significant sleep deprivation. So I no longer take a red eye flight, for any reason other than the airlines messing up. Did you have specific triggers?
Yes, I have very specific food triggers. Mainly popcorn is my biggest one.
I never heard that one before.
Even the smell of it will trigger a migraine for me. So going to the movie theater is a challenge.
Right.
Not just watching that big screen, because that alone is a trigger, but the smell of the popcorn. Right. It's just very bright, it's very loud, and there's just a lot of information to take in. So that's difficult. But yeah, the smell and eating popcorn is a trigger. And the environmental trigger is huge for me. So weather and changes in barometric pressure, those are like my biggest triggers. And we can't control Mother Nature and storm patterns and weather patterns. So that really can knock me down for a few days. So there are certain seasons that are really difficult for me, like summer is the most difficult season for me to get through. I have the most migraine attacks during summer. And spring is like second runner up,
So how frequently
in the storms.
How frequently are you getting migraines?
Well, I pretty much am in pain every day.
Hi.
And I don't have superly severe attacks as often as I did about 5 or 6 years ago. I may have 1 to 2 severe migraine attacks, ones that I would classify as like being higher on the pain scale, maybe once or twice a month, but I experience some level of pain every day.
So I assume that you must be on a preventive medication.
Yes, I'm on several.
And clearly they're not working.
Well, if I wasn't on them, I'll probably be in worse condition.
Got it. So it's making the symptoms more manageable rather than preventing it altogether.
Exactly. And being on them helps my abortive medication work better.
Okay, so just for people who don't know, aren't familiar with the term abortive, you say abort and people are thinking either abort the mission or thinking having an abortion. in medicine, we use the term abortive just to mean to stop the symptoms. And that's as opposed to preventive, which tries to prevent it in the first place.
Right. The preventive medication is something that you take daily to help prevent the frequency and severity of your migraine. But the abortive is something you take at the onset of a migraine attack to abort or stop that particular attack from getting or progressing and getting worse or becoming a full-blown migraine attack. So at your first symptom, that's when you would take your abortive medication, whether that's an over-the-counter like an Excedrin migraine or a prescription like a sumatriptan or Imitrex. That's when you would take your abortive medication.
I actually had a migraine once where I was at the Congress on Women's Health in the early, I'm just going to totally guess, I think it was like the mid-1990s. And Maxalt, which was one of the sumatriptans, had just come out. And Maxalt is a drug that goes under your tongue.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was walking through the exhibit area of this conference with Dr. Florence Hazeltine, who is, you know, a legend in women's health. And the two of us were walking, and one of us said, I forget which one of us said first. One of us said, "Oh, I feel like I have a migraine coming on." And the other one said, "Oh my God, I have a migraine too." And we were just walking past the booth that was, you know, trying to raise awareness about Maxalt from Merck. And so we said, "Oh, let's go over there and see if they have any free samples."
Mm-hmm.
One of the bonus benefits of being doctors. And we went over, and the sales rep did not have any samples. But here's where the sales rep saved the day. You know, we're in another state, so neither of us had a license to write our own prescriptions in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
He went back to his home, got the samples from his home, and drove back to the meeting to give them to him.
Wow, that was cool.
I've been a huge fan of Maxalt ever since, and it took exactly 20 minutes. So that's an unpaid commercial from Maxalt. They are not a sponsor of this podcast, but if they want to be, they can contact me at askdrdonica@gmail.com. But aside from that, we did another podcast episode with a psychologist who was talking about psychologic triggers of migraine. And a lot of people, of course, a migraine is mostly in your head, literally. So of course people want to get at the psychologic triggers. But unless you're in a really complex relationship or, you know, having, you know, pretty extraordinary psychosocial stressors, generally the triggers are things like dark chocolate, aged cheese, flickering lights. You talked about bright lights, loud noises, barometric pressure changes. I've often joked that Valentine's Day is a real bummer for people with migraines, although of course diamonds never triggered a migraine.
Yeah.
So always give jewelry if you're not sure if your beloved has migraines. So anyway, how did you progress from this long history of suffering with migraines to becoming a patient advocate and becoming, you know, tell us about how the origin of the Migraine Diva concept?
Sure. So it pretty much started around 2007, 2006. That's when I really started to become chronic. And throughout that process, I started to feel extremely isolated because I didn't know anybody else who experienced migraine like I did. Although it does run in my family, and a lot of my first cousins do have migraine, they're all episodic and have very few migraine attacks. I've always had the most frequent and the most severe. So I've always felt very isolated in that regard. And none of my girlfriends or people in my social circle had migraine or even experienced a severe headache that they could even relate to. So it was really difficult for me. And eventually I got to this point where I just needed to reach out to find a community of people like myself. So in 2011, that's when I started my blog. And I chose the name The Migraine Diva because it was important for me to maintain my identity, because with migraine, it encompassed so much of my life. I was in pain every single day. At that point, I had chronic migraine, which meant I had 15 or more migraine days per month. I also had new daily persistent headaches, so I had headache days every month, and I had chronic daily headache. So I was in pain every day. And that can encompass who you are, and you start to fall into what your symptoms are and forget who you are. So it's important for me to maintain my identity. And I'm a girl's girl, and I love makeup, and I like getting pretty, and I wanted to maintain that. So that's where the diva part comes in, because I wanted to maintain that piece of me and hold on to that.
Let's also connect the dots for people a little bit about the isolation. You've mentioned how isolating this is a couple of times, but I don't think we've connected for people who don't have migraine that really the only treatment for migraine is to go to bed, lights off, no noise, no company, and just kind of stay there in a cool, dark place and sleep. Sleep is the biggest blessing for somebody with a migraine.
Exactly.
And for some people, a migraine can last 3 to 5 days. In your case, how long do they last?
Typically for me, a migraine can last between 2 to 3 days. So that's a huge chunk of time that's taking me out of life.
Right, out of commission.
Right. And so in that regard,
migraine that caused you to be hospitalized?
Yes, I have. I would have to go in for almost a week at a time to get infusions. DHE is the medication to help break the migraine or bring it down to a tolerable enough level. And that takes quite a few days to do. And it's a really intense drug, and you have to be monitored 24/7 on that. So I have been hospitalized quite a few times, having to go to the urgent care or emergency room to be treated. That's happened very frequently. But with the isolation, because it does, take up 2 to 3 days of my week when I have a severe migraine, that means I'm in my room, I'm in my bed, I'm at home, I don't leave the house, I'm not around other people. And it really impacts your social life.
And you can't even watch TV.
Right, because that's a trigger, because it's so bright, it is too noisy. So you get really, really you're by yourself, alone with your pain. And that in turn can affect you mentally and emotionally. And that's why so many people with migraine also have depression and anxiety, because it's such an isolating disease, and it does take so much away from you. And it's very scary, and it's not how we want to live our lives. We want to be productive, and we want to be with the people that we love. We want to, go to work. We want to be self-sufficient. But it's hard, especially when you become chronic like myself. It takes away your careers. I'm unable to work. It takes away some of your independence. It's, I have to rely on my husband a lot more than I would like to. My kids are older now, but they have to do a lot more around the house, and I still get that mom guilt. So it steals a lot, and it makes it difficult to get through normal day-to-day activities without feeling guilty or like a burden.
The fear is that we always make a big deal with people about, if you're having the worst headache of your whole life, go directly to the emergency room, because you could be having a stroke or a brain aneurysm.
Right.
And so when you have migraines and it's the worst headache of your life every single time, you don't know when it's quote unquote just a migraine versus something different or something more serious. I actually went to the emergency room once with a migraine that did mimic a stroke, and it was actually called a hemiplegic migraine.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way to know that is after you've had an MRI of your brain, and you're found not to have had a stroke. And then you respond to migraine medicines, and unlike a stroke, 24 hours later, you're better. Or that's what happened in my case. But when I say mimic a stroke, I had the right facial droop and right-sided weakness and couldn't move my hand, and totally was slurring my speech and vomiting tremendously. Actually, I think at the time I thought it was a ruptured aneurysm, because it was like the worst pain, and I couldn't stop vomiting. The good news, again, being a physician, when I got to the emergency room and I said, I think I'm having a ruptured aneurysm, And I think I was about 40 years old at the time. I got seen immediately.
Mm-hmm.
My tushy never hit the seat in the emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very scary. It's very scary. And thank God I wasn't driving at the time. I was actually in a car, but somebody else was driving. And I do remember thinking that, like, thank God I wasn't the driver, because that could be very disruptive. So I still do want everybody to, despite the fact that we're raising awareness about migraine, I do want everybody to know that if they're having the worst headache of their whole lives, they do have to go to the emergency room to make sure it's not a stroke. And of course, people with migraine do have an increased risk of stroke, especially African American women.
Yes, yes. And another part of that fear is that fear of when the next attack is going to occur. So we're always anticipating when that next one is going to occur. And so we live our lives not as freely, I want to say, because we're always, migraine to me is like a thief, and it's just like waiting around the corner to sneak up and just snatch away the rest of your day. So we have to be very wary of what types of environment we bring ourselves into. And, just as simple as walking into a waiting room and somebody could have on the strongest cologne or aftershave or body spray or perfume.
Or you're in the elevator and they walk in.
Right.
So we didn't talk about that as fragrances as a trigger.
Right. And that can completely upset your whole day. And knowing that can happen at any moment, we always have that in the back of our mind. So that's another part of the fear and anxiety of living with migraine. We try to manage the triggers that we have as best that we can, but there are always going to be events that are outside of our control that, somebody smoking a cigarette or car exhaust can be really, really strong. The smell of gasoline, I know that's a trigger for me. So just, there's so many things to worry about. And so you become these worry warts and, it becomes really difficult to learn how to manage that type of anxiety around your illness.
Well, and especially when you're a mother and you've got, young kids that you're responsible for taking care of. Your children are how old now?
They're 21, 18, and 17.
Okay, so you're out of the woods in that regard. I remember one of the things that was very stressful for me was when my daughter turned about 10 or 11, there was a time when I was having a very bad migraine, and my husband was out of town, and she had to take care of me. I was on the floor vomiting and just couldn't move. And she was so cute. She got me into bed. She got my medicine. She did all the things, I told her to do. And then I could hear her on her phone reporting to her father, who was also a doctor. And she just went like she was the little medical student. And she reported on the situation. She gave him an update. And I heard her say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. I got mommy in bed. She had her medicine. And then I heard her say, so now can I order takeout to be delivered to the house?
Yeah. One thing I can certainly say, because my children were young when I was going through the real difficult moments of being chronic, but it created these very empathic adults, very compassionate. And one thing that they've always done is always made me feel like I've always been a great mother, even though I felt like I could always do more. Because I always felt so limited by my pain, but they've always managed to make me feel like I've done a great job. But they're extremely empathic and just compassionate people. And I would like to think that they would be like that anyway, but I think the experience of having a chronically ill parent and having sometimes to take care of me in situations where my husband wasn't home. He works midnights, so he was asleep during the day when they're at school, and then he'd leave for work. So I was with them, during the afternoon, and a lot of times that's where my pain would spike. So they would have to take care of me and get my ice packs and get my medicine and help me up the stairs and help me with dinner and things like that. I think it just created, different human beings because of that experience.
And do any of them have migraine?
My daughter does. She's experiencing more attacks now, but a lot of hers are menstrual migraine. But she does have a lot of similar triggers as I do. So I'm keeping a very close eye on her and her symptoms. But she's able to, she notices when one's coming on and she can take an over the counter and that'll stop it for her. She hasn't been needed to go on any preventive medication or take any prescription medication to stop her migraine. So she's doing okay, but she's experiencing the most. My oldest son does have occasional headache, but he's able to manage his with mostly ice and ibuprofen. So, but my youngest, no headaches.
Knock wood. So
Yeah.
we say that about 50% of people with migraine have a parent who has a history of migraine, but it doesn't work the opposite way around, of course, thank goodness. I said that once on a television interview, and my son was about 7, and he watched the interview on TV, and then he said to the interviewer said to me, "So are migraines hereditary?" And I said, "Yes, you get them from your children." And so I came home, and he said, "Mommy, who gives you more migraines, me or my sibling?" So I thought that was very funny.
Yeah.
And I explained to him that was just my attempt at humor. That was just a joke, that he didn't give me migraines. But one of the things that's very controversial about menstrual migraine, and of course menstrual migraine is the most difficult to treat. Menstrual migraine is generally a migraine that somebody gets every single month right before their period. But one of the controversial topics is whether or not birth control pills can reduce the incidence of migraine. Because in about half of women, birth control pills will reduce or eliminate migraines, particularly menstrual migraines. And in half of women, it will make it much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we don't have a crystal ball that can tell us which women will respond which way. And of course, the other downside that we always worry about with birth control pills is that in a very, 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 very small percentage of women who are at increased risk of stroke, birth control pills can increase your risk of stroke. So it would be really nice to have a way of identifying those women. Did you ever try birth control pills to reduce your migraines?
No. Even though I did have menstrual migraine, at that point, when they became more of an issue, I was already on preventives. And I really didn't do too well on birth control in the past. So I just kind of stuck it out and just dealt with it because I was already dealing with pain every other day of the month. So except those I can manage a little bit differently because they were triggered by hormones. So, which was weird. I can kind of abort those a little bit easier for some reason. So I just kind of dealt with them like I do with any other migraine attack. But I've never tried to manage them with birth control. But that's something I'm looking into to see if that might help my daughter. She is currently on birth control to help with her severe cramping. But I don't know if it's having any significant impact on her migraine. It doesn't seem like it is. So she may not benefit or she may need to change. I don't know.
And that's the big issue is that, there are many, many different types of pills and some are better for migraine prevention than others.
Right. So that's something I am researching and looking into for her sake, because that is her biggest trigger are the menstrual migraine for her. And she'll have a migraine pretty much for the length of her menstrual cycle. And plus she does have environmental triggers. So, and summers for her are starting to be bad for her too. But that's definitely something I'm looking into to help her prevent having to have so many migraine days during that, time of month for her.
So Migraine Diva is your blog. Tell us more about the other advocacy that you do on behalf of migraine and patients with migraine.
Absolutely. So patient advocacy kind of fell into my lap. It really wasn't something I was looking to do, but it started with myself and how I approach my healthcare. It was important for me to get a handle on how I saw my treatments and how I wanted to progress with them. And for so many people, they find it very difficult to have conversations with their physicians or their healthcare team because they feel intimidated or they feel like they don't have a voice. And it was important for me to figure out that, I have an important stake in this. This is my health. And I really wanted to have a group of people around me that were really invested in seeing me get well, being on the same track as me. And when I found that empowerment, I wanted to share that with my followers. So that's where patient advocacy grew from for me, was really trying to empower other people living with migraine or depression or anxiety to really find their voice and to be okay with speaking up about things that they're curious about, you want to question, aren't comfortable with, really taking charge of their healthcare. And it was really important for me to also shed the stigma and guilt behind migraine. So especially as a woman, we are so stigmatized as people who are unreliable and can't be depended on and are flaky and just don't show up. But we're extremely strong and valuable and creative and unique individuals. And we are not the personification of our pain.
Well, what I always say is that when a woman gets a migraine, you basically have to go on with all your daily tasks and all your jobs. But when a man gets a migraine, you remember Terrell Owens when he got a migraine and the whole Super Bowl had to be stopped?
Yes. Yes.
So when a man gets a migraine, the Super Bowl is suspended. When a woman gets a migraine, okay, it's a day ending in Y. We just go on.
Right. And
no offense to Mr. Owens, but the Super Bowl was stopped for, a good 20 minutes when he had
gender plays a huge role in how we're, perceived and how we're treated when it comes to our pain. And with women, it's more dismissible, or, it's, oh, you're just overstressed, you're not managing your stress well, or it can be often be blamed for being depressed as a mental illness. Or it's a personality flaw, and you're just weak, you're not able to handle things. So it's different for women. And you're right, we're expected to still power through and get things done. And I think that's makes it harder for women to kind of take a step back and take care of themselves. And that's something that I was guilty of. I was not taking care of myself. And it was my husband that taught me the most important lesson while having a chronic illness. For so long, I would push through my pain and try to be this super mom and this exceptional wife and push through my pain and suffer through it just because I want to feel like I was being the best person for them. And he told me one day, he said, it's okay that you're not okay. We're fine. The kids are fine. I've got this. We don't think any less of you. Just take care of yourself. And it finally clicked. If he's telling me it's okay for me to not be okay, then it probably is. So that's something I like to extend to other people. It's okay for you not to be okay.
Well, the other thing is it's okay and it's completely understandable to have a chronic illness and also have anxiety and depression.
Right.
Very often it's too easy to say, oh, well, obviously this is all in your head. This is because you have anxiety and depression. And many times what we need to advocate for ourselves is, no, I had this first. Mm-hmm. And then after dealing with this for all these years, I developed anxiety and depression.
Right.
So, and we do know from all kinds of data, not just in people with migraine, but with many other diseases, disorders, and conditions, that if the depression is also treated, it becomes much easier to treat whatever the original condition is, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So they do go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Affecting, what's affected is brain chemistry and neurochemistry. So that whole thing about the knee bone being connected to the shin bone, works in the brain too, and with neurotransmitters, which are, brain messenger chemicals.
Absolutely. It's important for me to treat myself in a whole aspect. So that's including my mental, emotional, physical, spiritual self. So it's important for me to use cognitive behavioral therapy, not only to treat my depression and anxiety, but I also see a pain psychologist to help me work through the physical pain and how that affects me mentally and emotionally, and using breathing techniques and relaxation techniques, and identifying when when my pain is making me feel a certain way emotionally, and identifying what that is, what that emotion is, and how do I respond to that. That's very important. And having healthy coping mechanisms. So it's very important to treat everything in unison, because one does affect the other. And when you're treating one, it does help you treat the other in a more successful way. So it's a marriage, and having a team of people around you that understand that and work together to get you to your most healthy self is very, very important. And that's something that I advocate a lot. You're so worth putting as much as you can into your health and your well-being. And as women, we don't tend to take care of ourselves as much as we should. We put ourselves on the back burner and take care of everybody else first. And we're not taught that growing up, that it's okay to take care of yourself first. We don't see our mothers doing that. We don't see our grandmothers doing that. So we don't understand that that's something that we should be doing. And I learned that later on in life. And I want to make that an important piece of my advocacy work, because this does affect so many women, and it's women that I speak to more often. I want them to have the permission to put themselves first. Self-care is so important. Take that time to meditate for 5 to 10 minutes and set your intentions for the day. Even if all you can do is get up and brush your teeth and, put on your yoga pants and sit on the couch. That was your intention, and you completed that, and feel good about that. It doesn't make you...
American women everywhere, I do have to say yoga pants was one of the great inventions of all time.
Yes, they're amazingly comfortable.
So in terms of patient advocacy, one of the things I find myself doing a lot, whether it's about migraine or any other condition, is debunking common myths and misconceptions and misperceptions. And of course, with respect to migraine, there are many. What would you say are sort of your top 3 pieces of information you would like to just correct for the record about migraine?
I guess the most frequent one, and this is something in our circles that we get tired of saying, but migraine is more than a headache. Headache is just a symptom of migraine, and you don't have to have head pain to have migraine. Migraine is a neurobiological disease. It is a very complex disease, and it affects everybody differently. So it's not a one cut fits all type of illness. You can't just have like one treatment that's going to fix everybody. Everybody responds differently. So that's the biggest one. The second one would be no, drinking more water is not going to cure us. We get told that a lot. Yes, dehydration doesn't help. If you're dehydrated, you're more at risk of having a migraine, but we can drink our 8 glasses of water a day or half our body weight in ounces per day of water and still be chronic and still have migraine every day. So it does help to be hydrated, but that's not going to cure migraine. And the third is there is no cure currently for migraine. That's a big thing. We get pushed these old wives' tales of remedies, cream of tartar, sniffing cayenne pepper, putting your feet in hot water or your feet in cold water and having your hands in hot water.
You weren't doing it right.
Yeah. Just all these different things. Drinking like green juice is going to get rid of your migraine. Yes, having a healthy lifestyle does help, but there is no cure. And it's really frustrating for people to constantly have somebody tell them what they should be doing to get better, because we actually are doing everything we can to get better.
Most people are. I mean, some people
Yeah.
aren't. You would be amazed how many people I run into just in my regular day. For some reason, very often at restaurants, I'll have a waiter who will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just having a migraine." And I'll say, "Did you take your medicine?" And they'll say, "Well, not yet." And I feel like I'm constantly beating my head against a wall. Try to if there was one message I could get out to people who have already been diagnosed with migraine, is that whatever medicine you take, whether it's an over-the-counter medicine that works for you or a prescription medicine, whatever the medicine is, take it right away. Don't get any brownie points for suffering. But also, I don't think people realize that migraine is an evolution. It's a process that gets set into motion. And the sooner you can halt that process, the sooner you can get relief. And of course, taking your medication is not enough. Ideally, you want to take your medication and then go lie down in a cool, dark, quiet place. I recognize that when people are working, they don't have that opportunity, or if they're taking care of small children, or if they're in the middle of something urgent. But that having been said, for everybody else, take your medicine and go lie down. What's the one thing you would tell people? What's the one most important message that you have for people who are suffering from migraine?
My most important message is to understand that you are not your migraine, and you are not your depression or your anxiety. It's important to remain true to who you are. That part of you is not diminished because you live with a chronic illness, and it does not personify who you are as a person. You still have value, you still have worth, and you are worthy of self-love and self-care, and you're important enough to take care of yourself first. And that's very important. That's a huge lesson I had to learn. And that's one that I really would like everybody to be able to learn for themselves and take that to heart and really apply that to their lives.
I think that's perfect, and I couldn't end on a better place. That is a great message. I could talk to you all day about this, but I want to be cognizant of the fact that you're not feeling so well today. So I really appreciate you being here with us. How can people find you in your blog?
My blog is themigrainediva.com. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at The Migraine Diva, and on Facebook, The Migraine Diva. You can find my page there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jaime Sanders, The Migraine Diva. And as always, you can find me way too much on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Dr. Donica, or you can email me any of your questions at askdrdonica@gmail.com. Thanks again, and tune in next time for another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room. Take care.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.